Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Plain English Podcast. I'm Emily.
And I'm David. We're really happy to have you here with us again today.
Whether you're studying English very seriously,
Or just pretending to study while scrolling on your phone.
yes, we see you.
And honestly, we respect the effort.
Exactly. At least you pressed play and decided to listen, and that already counts as progress.
Every small step helps when you're learning a language.
Before we jump into today's topic, we have a quick reminder.
If this podcast helps you improve your English speaking naturally, please follow the podcast.
And share it with one friend who also wants to sound more confident and fluent in English.
Learning English alone is good.
But learning English together with friends is even better.
Okay, Emily, let's talk about today's topic.
Yes, today's topic is interesting.
Very interesting.
And honestly, a little confusing for many English learners.
That's right. Today we are talking about two very small expressions.
The words must and have to.
Two short phrases, but they create a lot of confusion for people learning English.
David, why do you think these two expressions confuse learners so much?
Because in many situations, they mean almost the same thing.
Almost the same, but not exactly the same.
And that small difference is what makes learners nervous.
Yes, many learners hear both and start to panic.
They wonder which one they should use.
So let's start with a simple question.
Are must and have to the same?
Sometimes yes.
And sometimes no.
Very helpful explanation, David.
Thank you. I try my best.
Okay, now explain it properly for our listeners.
Sure, both must and have to express obligation.
And obligation means that something is necessary.
Exactly. It means something needs to be done.
For example, listen to this sentence.
I must finish my work tonight.
Now listen to another sentence.
I have to finish my work tonight.
In both sentences, finishing the work is necessary.
The speaker cannot ignore the task.
So if both mean something is necessary, what is the real difference?
The difference is emotional and situational.
Emotional and situational. Explain that slowly.
Of course, the word must usually comes from inside you.
Inside you? You mean inside your mind or your decision?
Yes, it's often a personal decision or a personal feeling.
So, must is internal motivation.
Exactly.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, listen to this sentence. I must start exercising.
In this case, nobody forced you to exercise.
Right, it is your personal decision.
Maybe you want to become healthier.
Or maybe your brain suddenly realized, I need to take better care of myself.
So, the pressure comes from you.
Yes, it's self-pressure.
Okay, now let's talk about have to.
Good idea.
How is have to different?
Have to usually comes from outside pressure.
Meaning rules, schedules, or other people.
Exactly. Something outside you is creating the obligation.
Can you give an example?
Sure, listen to this. I have to start work at 9 a.m.
That doesn't sound like your personal choice.
Correct.
That sounds like your company's rule.
Yes, the company's schedule creates the obligation.
So, have to often refers to external rules or responsibilities.
Yes, rules, laws, schedules, or expectations.
Let's look at another example.
Example number 1.
I must study tonight.
This sentence means I personally believe studying is necessary.
Maybe I want to improve my English.
Or maybe I feel guilty for not studying earlier.
So again, it's self-pressure.
Exactly.
Now let's look at example number 2.
I have to study tonight.
That sounds a little different.
Yes, maybe there is an exam tomorrow.
Or maybe the teacher gave homework that must be finished.
In this situation, the reason comes from outside.
So the pressure is external.
Exactly.
But, David, sometimes both expressions feel very similar.
You're right.
In normal conversations, many people use them almost the same way.
Yes, in casual English, people often use them interchangeably.
So, are English learners worrying too much about this difference?
Not completely,
Why not?
because in professional English, small differences can matter,
Especially in exams.
and also in job interviews.
Interesting.
There is also another important point.
What is that?
The word must often sounds stronger.
Stronger in what way?
For example, listen to this sentence. You must wear a seatbelt.
That sounds strict.
Yes, almost like a rule or an order.
Now let's compare another sentence.
You have to wear a seatbelt.
That still sounds like a rule.
Yes, but it feels slightly more like a normal requirement rather than a strong command.
Interesting. So sometimes the difference is very subtle.
Exactly.
And the best way to understand these differences is to keep listening and practicing.
The more real English you hear, the more natural these expressions will feel.
So don't stress too much.
Just keep listening, learning, and enjoying the process.
And we'll see you in the next episode of the Plain English Podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. So the meaning is still necessary, but the tone feels a little softer.
Exactly. The obligation is still there, but the sentence sounds less strict.
Interesting. So tone is also important when we choose between must and have to.
Yes, tone matters a lot in English communication.
Okay, let's make this practical for our listeners.
Great idea. Real situations always help people understand better.
Situation number 1. Imagine a doctor speaking to a patient.
The doctor might say, "You must stop smoking."
That sounds very serious.
Yes, because the doctor is giving strong advice.
The doctor is worried about the patient's health.
Exactly. The word must adds urgency and seriousness to the message.
Now let's imagine a different situation.
Okay.
A government rule.
For example, you have to pay taxes.
That clearly sounds like a law.
Yes, it's not a personal opinion.
It's something required by the government.
Exactly. That's why have to is often used for rules and laws.
Okay, David, now let's talk about grammar.
Good idea, because the structure of these two expressions is slightly different.
Let's start with must.
The grammar of must is very simple.
The structure is subject plus must plus base verb.
For example, I must go.
Or she must finish her homework.
Notice that the word must does not change.
It stays the same for all subjects.
Exactly. It's always must.
Now let's compare that with have to.
This is where grammar becomes a little different.
Because have changes depending on the subject.
Right. Listen to these examples.
I have to go.
She has to go.
They have to go.
So here we conjugate the verb have,
Exactly, and this is where many English learners make small mistakes.
especially when they forget to change have to has.
Yes, that happens very often.
Now let's talk about something extremely important.
The negative forms.
Yes, because the negative forms are very different.
And this difference can completely change the meaning.
So listen carefully.
Must not or mustn't means prohibition.
In other words, something is not allowed.
For example, you must not smoke here.
That means smoking is forbidden in that place.
Maybe it's a hospital or an airplane.
Exactly. It's a strict rule.
Now listen to a different sentence.
You don't have to come tomorrow.
That has a completely different meaning.
Yes, it means coming tomorrow is optional.
In other words, it's not necessary.
You can come if you want.
But you are not required to come.
This is a huge difference.
A very big difference.
Let's imagine a real situation.
Your boss speaks to you at the end of the workday.
The boss says, "You don't have to stay late today.
That means you are free to go home.
You can relax and finish work tomorrow.
But imagine the boss says something different.
You must not stay late today."
Now the meaning changes completely.
Yes, now staying late is not allowed.
Maybe the office is closing early.
Or maybe there is a security rule.
Either way, the meaning is totally different.
This is why understanding the negative forms is very important.
Wow, that really is an important difference.
Yes, many learners don't realize how big that difference is.
Okay, let's practice a little.
Great idea.
I will say a situation.
And I will choose must or have to.
Ready?
Ready.
Situation 1. You feel sick and decide to visit a doctor.
I would say I must see a doctor.
Good answer.
Because that decision comes from me.
Yes, it's a personal decision. Now give me another situation. Okay, the law says drivers must wear helmets.
Then I would say drivers have to wear helmets.
Correct.
Because that rule comes from the law.
Very good. You're improving already.
Thank you. Practice really helps.
Now let's talk about daily conversation.
Good point.
Which one is more common in everyday English?
Have to is usually more common, especially in American English.
And what about must?
Must often sounds a little more formal or more serious.
So if I say to my friend, I must leave now,
It might sound a little dramatic.
like I'm in a movie scene.
Exactly.
Many native speakers would simply say, I have to go.
Yes, that sounds more natural in casual conversation.
Okay, let's summarize everything clearly.
Good idea.
Must usually expresses strong obligation.
And it often comes from internal motivation.
It also has a more serious tone.
Now let's look at have to.
Have to usually expresses external obligation.
Things like rules, laws, schedules, or responsibilities.
And it's very common in everyday speech.
Now let's review the negative forms.
Must not means prohibited.
Something is not allowed.
Don't have to means not necessary.
That negative difference is extremely important.
Yes, if you understand that difference, you are already ahead of many learners.
Absolutely.
All right, now things are about to get more interesting.
Yes, because until now, we talked about the basics.
Internal versus external obligation.
Strong tone versus normal tone.
And the very important negative difference.
Exactly.
But now we're moving into a more advanced area.
Yes, the advanced zone.
Because the word must is not used only for obligation.
That's right.
Must also has another very powerful meaning.
It can express a logical conclusion.
In other words, a strong guess based on evidence.
Exactly.
Okay, David, explain that slowly for our listeners.
Now let's talk about another important use of the word must.
Yes, this is where things become more advanced.
Earlier, we talked about must as a way to express obligation.
Right, something that is necessary or required.
But must also has another meaning.
A very powerful meaning.
It can express a logical conclusion.
Exactly.
David, explain that slowly for our listeners.
Sure, when we use must to show a logical conclusion, we are not talking about obligation anymore.
So we are not talking about rules or duties.
Correct. Instead, we are talking about deduction.
Deduction means using facts or evidence to make a strong guess.
Yes, a guess that feels almost certain.
So it's not just guessing randomly.
No, it's guessing based on clues.
Can you give an example?
Of course, imagine you walk past a house late at night,
You look at the windows.
and you notice that all the lights are off.
The house is completely dark.
Then you might say, they must be asleep.
So you are guessing,
Yes, but it's a strong guess.
because the evidence suggests it.
Exactly.
Let's try another example.
Imagine your friends studied all night.
They were preparing for an important exam.
The next day, you see them at school.
They look exhausted.
So you say, you must be tired.
In this case, it's not a rule.
No, it's simply logical thinking.
You're observing the situation and drawing a conclusion.
Exactly.
Now, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can we say, you have to be tired?
No, that doesn't work in this situation.
Why not?
Because have to is used only for obligation.
So it's used for rules, responsibilities, and requirements.
Exactly.
but it is not used for logical conclusions.
Right.
So if someone says, she has to be at home while guessing,
That would sound incorrect.
what would be the correct sentence?
The correct sentence is, she must be at home.
Because we are making a logical guess.
Exactly.
That really is a big difference.
Yes, a very important difference.
Okay, let's create a small scene.
Sounds fun.
Imagine you go to visit a friend.
You arrive at their house,
You knock on the door.
but nobody answers,
You look at the driveway.
and their car is not there.
So what would you say?
I would say, they must not be home,
Perfect.
because the evidence suggests they are not there.
And we would not say they don't have to be home,
Now, that would sound strange.
because that changes the meaning completely.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about the past.
Yes, this is where many learners become confused.
Because must does not have a normal past form for obligation.
That's right.
We cannot say musted.
Definitely not.
That word doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So when we talk about past obligation, we use had to.
Correct.
For example, I had to work late yesterday.
Here, the obligation happened in the past.
So we use had to.
Yes.
We cannot say I must work late yesterday.
That sentence sounds wrong.
Because must doesn't normally show past obligation.
Exactly.
But David, I have heard people say must have.
Yes, that's a different structure.
What does it mean?
Must have plus past participle expresses past deduction.
In other words, a logical guess about something in the past.
Exactly.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine I called you yesterday.
But I didn't answer the phone.
Then I might say, you must have been busy.
So you are guessing about the past.
Yes, based on the situation.
Let's try another example.
Imagine you walk outside after a storm.
The ground is completely wet.
Then you might say, it must have rained.
Again, it's a logical conclusion about the past.
Exactly.
Okay, let's review everything clearly.
Good idea.
Present obligation, I must finish this report.
External obligation, I have to finish this report.
Past obligation, I had to finish the report.
Present deduction, she must be tired.
Past deduction, she must have been tired.
Step by step, the pattern becomes clearer.
Yes, it really does.
Now let's talk about questions.
Good point.
In normal conversation, people usually avoid asking questions with must.
Really?
Yes, it sounds very formal.
For example, must I finish this today?
Grammatically correct.
But not very common in everyday conversation.
Exactly. Most people would say, do I have to finish this today?
That sounds more natural.
Especially in casual speech.
Yes. Okay, let's move to some workplace situations.
Great idea.
Situation 1, a company rule.
Employees have to wear ID badges.
That's an external rule. Exactly. Situation 2, personal responsibility.
I must improve my presentation skills.
That shows personal motivation.
Yes, it comes from inside the speaker.
Situation 3, your manager sees that you look tired.
The manager says, you must be exhausted after that meeting.
That is a logical conclusion.
Exactly.
See how the meaning changes depending on the situation?
Yes, the same word can express different ideas.
Let's repeat one important warning.
Yes, this is very important.
Listen carefully.
You mustn't park here.
That means parking here is prohibited.
Let's continue with another very important comparison.
Yes, especially the difference in negative sentences.
Listen carefully to these two sentences.
The first one is, you mustn't park here.
That sentence means parking here is prohibited.
In other words, it is not allowed at all.
Now, listen to the second sentence.
You don't have to park here.
That means parking here is optional.
You can park here if you want.
But you are not required to do it.
These two sentences may look similar.
But the meanings are completely different.
If you confuse these two in real life, it could create problems.
And sometimes very big problems.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about emotional strength.
Yes, because sometimes must carries stronger emotion.
Imagine a mother speaking to her child.
She says, "You must call me when you arrive."
That sentence sounds serious and caring.
She really wants to know that her child is safe.
Now, imagine she says something slightly different.
You have to call me when you arrive.
It still sounds serious.
But the emotional tone feels a little softer.
Yes, slightly less emotional and more practical.
That's interesting.
So sometimes must carries emotional intensity.
Now let's test your understanding with some situations.
Okay, I'm ready. Situation number 1. You look up at the sky.
You see very dark clouds.
The wind is getting stronger.
What would you say?
I might say it must rain soon.
That's close.
Is the grammar correct?
The idea is correct, but it sounds a little unnatural.
What would be a more natural sentence?
A better sentence would be, "It must be going to rain."
Ah, that sounds more natural.
Yes, because we are making a logical prediction.
Okay, next situation.
Yesterday, you missed the bus.
You were late for work.
What happened next?
I had to take a taxi.
Perfect answer.
Because the obligation happened in the past.
Exactly.
Next situation.
A teacher is explaining a classroom rule.
The teacher says students have to submit their homework on time.
Excellent example.
Because it's an external rule.
Yes, the rule comes from the teacher or the school.
Now, let's talk about why this topic is important for fluency.
That's a great question.
Why do modal verbs matter so much?
Because modal verbs show confidence in speech.
When you use must, have to, had to, and must have correctly,
You sound much more natural and advanced.
it's not just about grammar.
It's about control.
Many English learners understand the rules when they study.
But when they start speaking, something happens.
They suddenly panic.
Yes, their mind freezes.
Their brain becomes empty for a moment.
Then they think, should I say must or have to?
Then they worry, what if I say it wrong?
And that fear blocks their fluency.
Exactly.
That's why this final part is very important.
Because now we focus on automatic speaking,
Not overthinking,
not memorizing grammar rules again.
but building natural instinct.
Because real English is not spoken from grammar charts.
It is spoken from habit.
So let's build that habit together.
Imagine this situation.
You are talking to a friend.
Your friend says, I feel tired all the time.
What would you say?
You might say, you must rest more.
That sounds like strong personal advice.
Exactly.
We would not normally say, you have to rest more.
Because the advice comes from your concern.
It comes from your heart.
Exactly.
Now, let's change the situation.
Your friend says, my company says I need to submit a medical certificate.
Now, what would you say?
I would say, oh, then you have to go to the doctor.
Because the company requires it.
Exactly.
That's an external rule.
Feel the difference between those two situations.
One is emotional.
The other is structural.
Now, let's go a little deeper.
Many learners start using must everywhere.
Because it feels simple.
But native speakers usually don't overuse must.
In daily conversation, they often prefer have to.
Because it sounds more natural.
And less dramatic.
For example, I have to wake up at 6 o'clock.
That sounds very natural.
Now compare it with, I must wake up at 6 o'clock.
That sentence is possible.
But it sounds stronger.
Almost like a promise to yourself.
Exactly.
So tone matters a lot.
For example, I must stop eating junk food.
That sounds like strong determination.
Now compare it with, I have to stop eating junk food.
That might sound like a doctor's advice,
Same action.
but a different emotional energy.
Now let's practice something powerful.
Logical deduction.
This is where many learners forget the second meaning of must.
For example, imagine you didn't sleep last night,
Your eyes are red.
and you look extremely tired.
I might say, you must be exhausted.
Notice that I'm not giving an obligation.
I'm making a strong guess.
Exactly.
Let's look at more examples.
You must be joking.
You must be hungry.
In all these sentences, the speaker is almost sure.
And we do not use have to here.
For example, you have to be tired.
That sounds strange and unnatural.
So remember this important rule.
Logical conclusions belong to must.
Now let's clear one last confusion that can completely change the meaning of a sentence.
Yes, this is a very important difference that many English learners misunderstand.
We are talking about the difference between must not and don't have to.
At first glance, they may look similar.
But their meanings are actually very different.
So listen carefully to these two examples.
The first sentence is, you mustn't park here.
That sentence means parking here is forbidden.
In some situations, it may even be illegal.
Yes, maybe there is a traffic rule or a safety rule.
So the speaker is clearly saying that parking there is not allowed.
Now listen to the second sentence.
You don't have to park here.
That has a completely different meaning.
It means parking there is optional.
You are free to park somewhere else if you prefer.
So one sentence expresses prohibition.
And the other expresses freedom of choice.
That is a huge difference.
Yes, a very big difference.
This is exactly why grammar matters.
Sometimes just one small word can change the entire meaning of a sentence.
Now let's do a quick reaction practice.
Great idea.
I will say a situation.
And I will respond quickly.
The key rule is don't think too much.
Just react naturally.
Okay, situation number 1.
A government rule.
What would you say?
You have to pay taxes.
Good answer.
Because that obligation comes from the government.
Exactly.
Okay, give me another situation.
Situation number 2. Strong personal advice.
Then I would say you must drink more water.
Perfect.
Because it sounds like serious advice.
Exactly.
Next situation?
Situation number 3. Something is forbidden.
I would say you mustn't enter that room.
Excellent.
That clearly shows prohibition.
Now situation number 4.
Something is optional.
What would you say?
I would say you don't have to come if you're busy.
Perfect. Again.
See how quickly it becomes natural?
Yes, once you stop overthinking.
That's the key.
Overthinking slows down fluency.
But practice builds confidence.
And here is something very important for every learner.
If you make a mistake while speaking, it's okay.
Communication is always more important than perfection.
For example, if you say must instead of have to,
Most people will still understand you.
probably 90% of the time.
Exactly.
Fluency grows from courage.
Not from fear.
Yes, fear only blocks your voice.
Now let's share one powerful learning idea.
You must practice daily.
But you don't have to practice for 3 hours every day.
Even 10 focused minutes of speaking can be very effective.
The key is consistency.
Small effort every day creates big improvement over time.
And consistency builds confidence.
The more you speak, the less you panic.
And the less you panic, the more natural your grammar becomes.
It's a positive cycle.
Practice leads to confidence.
Confidence leads to fluency.
Before we finish this episode, let's summarize everything in simple words.
Good idea.
Use must when the feeling is strong and personal.
Also use must when giving serious advice.
Or when making a logical guess.
And remember that must not expresses prohibition.
Now let's talk about have to.
Use have to when the obligation comes from outside.
For example, rules, systems, laws, or requirements.
It is also useful for past and future forms.
So the system becomes clear and practical.
Yes, simple and useful for real conversations.
And before we close, let's share one final motivational thought.
You must believe that you can improve your English.
And you have to take action to make that improvement happen.
Because belief without action changes nothing.
And action without belief feels heavy and difficult.
The secret is to combine both.
Believe in yourself.
And take small daily steps.
If today's episode helped you understand this topic more clearly,
Please share it with one friend who is also learning English.
and follow our podcast for more real-life English lessons.
Lessons that make grammar practical and understandable.
Keep practicing,
Keep speaking.
and remember one final message.
You mustn't give up.
And you have to keep going.
See you in the next episode.
Goodbye, everyone!